Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Darcy, and in today's episode of the Science on the Edge podcast, I will be talking about supplements and drugs that have been shown to influence both lifespan and health span. So some compounds that you can obtain from any health food store and some prescription drugs that have been linked in various experiments with increasing health span and lifespan, so longevity-related supplements. There's nothing breathtaking that we have just yet, but there are a few compounds and a few drugs which are showing huge promise, huge potential. So I'll be discussing some of those now. So let's get started. Okay, so increasingly, scientists working in the field of longevity research have come to believe that various artificial and natural compounds have the ability to slow down the process or processes involved in aging. Many scientists believe that it's only now a matter of time before viable therapies for slowing down and eventually reversing the processes involved in aging become widely available. But there are some compounds that are already around which show some potential. Before I explain those different compounds and how they work, I'd just like to define a term or two. First term is senescent cells. Senescent cells. What are senescent cells? Well, they are basically endpoint cells. Within our bodies, we have a number of different types of cells, and they're getting worn out as we age. Cells become damaged, the DNA is damaged, the various organelles, the structures within the cells become damaged, and they age. Now, when a cell becomes damaged to the point where it can no longer perform its duties, its normal duties as a skin cell, a liver cell, a brain cell, whatever, then what happens to those cells is they can undergo one of three processes. The first process is known as apoptosis. This is when a cell chooses to die. It realizes it's damaged and it goes through a process of dying where it breaks into small pieces that are absorbed by surrounding cells. This prevents the cell from misbehaving. The second option open to the cell when it's damaged is to become immortal, to become cancerous. And that is basically what happens with some cells. Particularly as we age, they might become damaged to the point where they cannot initiate this program of apoptosis, and instead they just carry on accumulating mutations and may eventually become cancerous. The third option, a cell can become senescent. A senescent cell is basically a cell that no longer does what it's supposed to do. It's damaged in such a way that it cannot behave like a normal, efficient skin cell, brain cell, heart cell, whatever. So what it does is it kind of just stops. It stays where it is. It no longer performs the functions that it evolved to perform, but it doesn't go away either. It sort of sits there as an unwelcome guest in the body. And these senescent cells, they also release various factors that cause inflammation and dysfunction of the surrounding tissue. Collectively, these factors that are released are known as the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SAS, SASP. Senescent cells accumulate with aging, so a young person has very few. But as you go through life, more and more senescent cells accumulate in your tissues. And this can lead to a number of diseases, big number of diseases. So the sorts of diseases that can basically result from a buildup of senescent cells, both neurological, cardiovascular, your immune system can lose some functionality. So many diseases are associated with an accumulation of senescent cells. Aging is to a large extent due to this accumulation of senescent cells. So there's multiple chronic conditions that result from the buildup of senescent cells. We are trying to work out how to get rid of senescent cells in a body, because if you could just wipe them all out, perhaps at the age of 50 or so, then this would reduce the likelihood of developing all sorts of conditions associated with aging. There are some drugs that are in the design phase now. They are basically sort of chemotherapeutic type of drugs. The idea is they will kill senescent cells and leave healthy cells alone. This will give space in your body for new healthy cells to emerge and for organ and tissue function to be restored to that of someone a little bit younger. So these drugs are out, but they're not really prolific yet, these compounds. I'm going to now talk about some compounds which are becoming prolific. Before that, I will just define a couple of terms: phytonutrients and phytochemicals. In Greek, the term phyto means plant. Certain organic compounds that are found in plants are thus referred to as phytonutrients, many of which have been observed to have various health benefits. Phytonutrients are present in a large variety of vegetables, fruits, grains, nuts, and legumes, and are fairly easily obtained as supplements without, in most cases, the need for a prescription. So you can get some of these phytonutrients basically from the local health food store. The notable difference between nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats and phytonutrients is that phytonutrients are not essential for life. The non-essential nature of phytonutrients has resulted in increasing use of the more accurate term phytochemical when referring to such compounds. That's therefore the term phytochemical that I'll be using henceforth. Okay, so phytochemical benefits. So a very diverse group of compounds found, as I mentioned earlier, in a number of fruits, vegetables, etc., and some herbs, and they have been reported to possess a number of health benefits. Marketed as supplements by health food retailers, this group of naturally occurring compounds have been investigated for many years to try and work out if they possess any sort of health benefit. By the way, most of the stuff you do get in a health food store has little science to back up its effectiveness, but some compounds do have science to back up their claims. Such chemopreventative and or chemotherapeutic benefits. So there are a number of chemotherapeutic and chemopreventative benefits. So basically, it's shown that some compounds can reduce your likelihood of developing cancer or help to treat it if it arrives. But obviously, prevention is better than cure. Some phytochemicals have been shown to have cardiovascular benefits. They help the cardiovascular system, the heart, the circulation, also the nervous system, and various other systems within the body. So there's a lot of potential with certain phytochemicals. There's a reason that people that eat a lot of vegetables and fruits, which are very high in various phytochemicals, tend to live healthier and longer lives. Okay, so the first supplement I'm going to talk about is known as quercetin. Quercetin, quercetin. Quercetin has been shown to benefit the heart, reduce cholesterol levels, improve hypertension, high blood pressure. It's also been used to treat interstitial cystitis, prostatitis, so problems with the prostate, which many men get an inflamed prostate as they age, rheumatoid arthritis, and cancer. So quercetin has been shown to have beneficial effects against all of these diseases. So what is quercetin? Quercetin is a polyphenol and natural flavonoid found abundantly in vegetables and fruits. There's growing evidence suggesting that quercetin has therapeutic potential for the prevention and treatment of a number of diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and cardiovascular diseases, just being some of the potential applications of this compound. Mechanistically, Quercetin has been shown to exert antioxidant effects, mopping up free radicals, which can damage your cells, anti-inflammatory effects. Most diseases have some inflammatory component, whether Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, all sorts of other conditions, heart disease. They all have some sort of an inflammatory component. So bringing down inflammation in the body is usually a good thing. Quercetin has also been shown to modulate the signaling pathways and gene expression involved in these processes. What is gene expression? Let me explain. So gene expression. Every one of our cells, more or less, has got the same 20,000 genes within it. We have 20,000 genes approximately, but those genes aren't all just switched on the same in different cells. In a skin cell, you only need the genes involved in allowing skin to behave like skin to be switched on. The genes involved in heart cells that allow heart muscles to contract, those genes are not expressed in skin cells. So we have different genes that are expressed in different types of tissue, with the rest of the genes being switched off. When you switch a gene on, it's active, you make messenger RNA. And messenger RNA goes to a structure in the cell known as a ribosome, where it's read and proteins are produced. So when genes are switched on, one common result is you produce various proteins in the cells. Everything we are is pretty much protein, from the collagen in our skin to the digestive enzymes in our gut. All through our body, we have structures made of proteins. So proteins are necessary. They're coded for by various genes. Some genes benefit the cell. Some genes can be detrimental if they are either overexpressed or underexpressed, or expressed in the wrong type of cell. Quercetin seems to modulate various genes, the activity of various genes, in a beneficial way. So specifically, quercetin inhibits something called NF-kappa beta. So it inhibits its activation. And by doing so, helps to downregulate the immune system's inflammatory response. So NF-kappa beta is a pro-inflammatory compound that your cells produce for all sorts of reasons. We do need it. But if it's overactive, you get inflammation, which, as I mentioned earlier, is quite bad for you. So in vitro and animal models have shown that quercetin, which has a similar structure to the molecule resveratrol, which I'll be discussing a little bit later, has a large range of biological actions, including anti-carcinogenic, anti-inflammatory, and antiviral activities. It also attenuates lipid peroxidation, reduces the peroxidation of lipids, platelet aggregation, you need platelets for blood clotting, and capillary permeability. Your capillaries need to be a little bit leaky to allow nutrients to leave your blood and to go to travel to different parts of your body and feed your organs and tissues, basically. Quercetin is a proteasome activator. So it activates structures, organelles within the cell that are necessary for the regulation of proteins. It also has antioxidant properties, increases lifespan by increasing survival and viability of for example, of an experimental model. It was worked with this particular drug. It's been given to various animals. It's been put on cells in the lab, such as fibroblasts that you find in the skin. And it does seem to improve the survival of these various cell types and increase the lifespan in various animal models. It also has antiviral properties. So it's antiviral. It also has anti-amyloidogenic properties. What does that mean? Well, your brain accumulates, and your body for that matter, accumulates these abnormal proteins known as amyloids. These accumulate over time, especially as you get older. And in fact, the accumulation of amyloid in the brain is associated with Alzheimer's disease. It's a diagnostic marker of Alzheimer's disease. Now, what quercetin seems to do is suppress amyloidosis. So reduces the amount of amyloid in your body. So very good for aging well. It downregulates the pro-inflammatory MIR-155 and the oncomer MIR-21 and upregulates MIR-125B. Now, you don't need to know what those specific things do, but basically by regulating them in this manner, quercetin seems to bring down inflammation. And once again, inflammation is bad. Bringing it down in the body is usually good. Regarding heart disease, in vitro and animal studies, and some population-based studies actually as well, suggest that quercetin may reduce the risk of atherosclerosis. That's a buildup of plaque in your arteries that can lead to high blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, that kind of thing. Quercetin seems to protect against the damage caused by LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol, low density lipoproteins, which are bad. And it thus may help reduce the risk of death from heart disease or stroke. Studies show that quercetin supplementation reduces blood pressure, also in people with hypertension. So it actually helps to reduce blood pressure, but with very few side effects. There are other anti-inflammatory compounds, by the way, that we can find in our diet, such as omega-3 fats from fish, also olive oil, all good for suppressing inflammation. Regarding cancer, quercetin has been observed to inhibit the growth of cancer cells from breast, colon, prostate, ovarian, and various lung tumors. So it does seem to be anti-carcinogenic. One study found that frequent intake of quercetin-rich foods was associated with lower lung cancer risk. The association was even stronger amongst subjects who smoked more than 20 cigarettes a day. So smoking is bad, obviously. Best thing to do is to not smoke, but quercetin does seem to help protect smokers from lung cancer to a certain degree. Another study suggests that quercetin slows tumor growth in the lab in various leukemia cells that have been grown in the lab. So it's preventative against cancer, but it also slows down the growth of cancer when it does occur, which makes the cancer easier to treat. Regarding allergies, in a number of animal models, quercetin has been found to suppress anaphylactic responses. For example, in rats, it was used to do that. It also inhibits asthmatic inflammation in guinea pigs and rats. So good for hay fever, good for allergies. Various in vitro studies have shown that quercetin stabilizes the membranes of mast cells, which produce and secrete histamine into the body and reduces, therefore, the release of histamine. Histamine is what's causing the allergic response. If you can bring it down, you can dampen down allergies. In terms of sources of quercetin, it's found in large concentrations in apples, particularly the skin, in honey, raspberries, onions, red grapes, cherries, citrus fruits, and green leafy vegetables. Quercetin content is exceptionally high in onions, although I should say that it's higher in onions that are not overcooked. You lose some of it in the cooking process. While quercetin generally is found in citrus fruits, apples, onions, parsley, sage tea, and red wine, olive oil, grapes, dark cherries, and dark berries, such as blueberries, blackberries, and bilberries, are also high in quercetin. So it's out there. There's a lot of quercetin around. You can either get it from your diet or in supplements now. Fried or boiled foods, however, contain lower quercetin content, with boiling causing a reduction in quercetin levels. Long-term storage of foods changes the quercetin content too. Onions lose the quercetin content by up to 33% in the first 12 days of storage. Quercetin levels in strawberries, however, increase by 32% when stored at -20 degrees C for 9 months. So oddly, the quercetin actually increases with storage of strawberries. Growth conditions of plants is also a factor that influences the quercetin levels in those foods, with a higher quercetin content in plants exposed to larger amounts of UV radiation. Quercetin is poorly absorbed though, so taking it in pill form is not necessarily the best because it's quite hard to absorb. However, you can now get pills that contain quercetin and vitamin C, and the vitamin C enhances the rate of absorption of the quercetin. So if you do decide to start taking quercetin supplements, then I advise you look for supplements that come with vitamin C, or you just take vitamin C pills at the same time as your quercetin. In terms of dosage, in human studies, a dosage of quercetin up to 1,000 milligrams per day showed no adverse effects in the blood, the liver, and kidney function. So overdosing on the stuff is not so easy to do. Quercetin inhibited beta amyloid, induced neuronal cell death in hippocampal cultures at quite low concentrations. Well, what does that mean? Well, I mentioned amyloids, amyloid proteins, these defective proteins can cause disease. They can cause Alzheimer's disease specifically, but other diseases too. So getting rid of amyloid is good. The hippocampus is a part of the human brain involved in generating memories. There's a reason that people with dementia, Alzheimer's disease, tend to have problems with their memory, because the hippocampus gets damaged first by amyloid before the rest of the brain gets damaged. And the amyloid, it basically damages brain cells, makes you more likely to get Alzheimer's disease, but quercetin seems to inhibit specific amyloid proteins, so beta amyloid, for example. It also stimulates cytotoxicity at a concentration of about 40 micromoles. So you get some sort of toxicity levels of quercetin, but only when you put really quite high levels directly on the cells in culture. When combined with a compound known as bilobalide, it was found that quercetin increases the level of BDNF, which is very important. BDNF is brain-derived growth factor. So they, a team of scientists performed experiments where they gave mice quercetin and also bilobalide, these two supplements together. And these mice, basically, they were found to have more BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF, if you have high levels of it in your brain, you are more likely to have a better memory, better concentration, etc. BDNF stimulates the growth of neurons in the brain, allows them to form connections with each other, which is very good for, well, for protecting an aging brain. Okay, so quercetin does seem to be quite a useful compound. You might want to investigate that further yourselves, perhaps even supplement. There's more experiments, more research coming out all the time into the benefits of quercetin. Fascinating compound. But we'll move on now to another compound, one known as resveratrol. Now, resveratrol is a compound that I've worked with myself in the past. This particular compound I worked with when I was doing my PhD. So we took resveratrol amongst other compounds and we used it to try and treat cancer, basically, to try and kill cancerous cells. And there was some good results from those experiments. In fact, I've got a paper that is under review at the moment of my research of some experiments that I performed on liver cancer cells using resveratrol. It was quite effective at slowing their growth and in combination with another compound of killing cancer cells. So resveratrol is part of a group of compounds called polyphenols. They're thought to act like antioxidants, protecting the body against damage that can put you at higher risk for things like cancer and heart disease. So resveratrol belongs to a family of polyphenols called viniferanes, and it's called a phytoalexin, which is something you don't need to know much about, but it's just a group of the group that the compound actually falls into. It's produced in plants such as grapes, usually when they are stressed. So when there is some sort of stress, drought, heat, whatever, then the plants that produce resveratrol tend to produce larger amounts of it. So stressed cells produce more resveratrol than non-stressed cells. Okay, so it's found in two forms, a cis form and a trans form. Resveratrol was first identified in Ellebore roots. It's been shown to inhibit tumor formation in breast cancer and also to induce apoptosis, cell death, in several cancer cell lines, including ones that I worked with myself. Okay, so leukemia, breast cancer, all these types of cancer, resveratrol has been used to treat, at least in the lab. Some types of plants produce resveratrol and other still beans in response to stress, injury, fungal infection, and ultraviolet radiation. It's fat-soluble compound that occurs in the trans and cis forms, different configurations. It's in the skin of red grapes, but it's also found in peanuts and berries, various berries such as blueberries, bilberries, cranberries. In grapes, resveratrol is found only in the skins. In terms of availability, it's well absorbed by humans when taken orally, but its bioavailability is relatively low due to its rapid metabolism and elimination. So it gets into the body, but it gets broken down quite easily. This resulted in a backlash by the scientific community a number of years ago. When resveratrol was first discovered, it seemed to be the darling compound. Lots and lots of journal articles were published about the benefits of resveratrol. But when further experiments found out that determined that resveratrol is broken down quickly and eliminated quickly from the body, interest in the compound started to wane. But it turns out that, yes, resveratrol is broken down easily, but the metabolites of resveratrol, the compounds that result from its breaking apart, last quite a while in the body, and they have similar effects to the main compound. So the breakdown products of resveratrol are also good for you. In terms of blood pressure and heart disease, a 2015 review concluded that high doses of resveratrol may help reduce the systolic blood pressure, so reduce blood pressure. Typically, systolic blood pressure goes up with age, and it's linked with heart attack, stroke, that kind of thing. So anything that can reduce blood pressure has got to be a good thing. Resveratrol may reduce blood pressure by helping to produce more nitric oxide, which is then released into the blood and relaxes blood vessels. In one study, human subjects were given grape extract fortified with extra resveratrol. Now, after 6 months of treatment, the LDL, that is bad fat, low density lipoproteins, reduced by 4.5%, and the oxidized LDL reduced by 20%, compared to participants who took an unenriched grape extract or a placebo. So basically, it seems that resveratrol reduces the amount of bad fat in your circulation, which with Western diets is a very good thing. In terms of diabetes, resveratrol influences insulin resistance. Now, type 2 diabetics, basically the condition results from a lack of sensitivity to insulin. So basically we have insulin receptors on our cells. The more junk food you eat, especially sugars, the less sensitive your cells become to insulin, because it just keeps spiking, going up and down, up and down. And as a result of this spiking of insulin, your cells lose sensitivity to it, which results in poor regulation of sugar in your body and maybe type 2 diabetes. It activates a particular gene, SIRT1. The SIRT1 gene is linked with stress responses. So if your body is damaged, if it's stressed, if you are starving, the SIRT1 gene will be activated, and it will allow your cells to run in more of an efficient manner. So your cells will basically go into a sort of lean burn. They will recycle various components within them, including damaged proteins. So damaged proteins, damaged organelles within the cells that have been accumulating for years. Activation of a SIRT1 gene helps to get rid of that junk. The cells sort of digest themselves in a process known as autophagy, under the command of SIRT1, which is stimulated by resveratrol. It also activates AMPK, a protein that helps the body metabolize glucose. Activated AMPK helps keep blood sugar levels low, which is a good thing. In terms of longevity, resveratrol stimulates the production of sirtuins, such as SIRT1, and therefore acts as a caloric restriction mimetic. Now, calorie restriction has been in the press and certainly in the scientific journals for many decades now. Basically, if you restrict an animal's caloric intake, but you make sure it's got enough water, enough nutrients, you tend to get activation of sirtuins. Cells go into a lean burn, and the animals tend to live longer and healthier. A review of studies looking at research into resveratrol and longevity found that resveratrol increased lifespan in 60% of the organisms studied, but the effect was strongest in organisms that were less related to humans, such as worms and fish. Evidence is still not firm enough in humans. It takes a long time to kind of see if a drug or a compound will increase longevity in a human, because we live so long anyway. In terms of the nervous system and insulin sensitivity, resveratrol interferes with beta amyloids in the brain, which are crucial to forming the plaques that accumulate in Alzheimer's disease. So basically, by taking resveratrol, you help remove some of these nasty little plaques in the brain, well, at least prevent them from being formed so easily, which reduces the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's disease. So now let's talk about another interesting supplement known as sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is a category of compound known as an isothiocyanate. It's a sulfur-rich compound found in cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli, pak choy, cabbage. It's found in very high concentrations in broccoli sprouts. If you grow the sprouts, and they're still quite short, they're just sprouting, they have huge amounts of sulforaphane in them. The inactive form is known as glucoraphanin, and it belongs to the glucosinolate family of plant compounds. It's activated when glucoraphanin comes into contact with myrosinase, a family of enzymes that play a role in the defense response of plants. Basically, you have the glucoraphanin in cells in the plants, and you also have myrosinase, but they're sort of separated from each other. When you chew the plants, the two come in contact with each other, and myrosinase, which is an enzyme, basically activates the glucoraphanin, and you basically get sulforaphane. And sulforaphane does all sorts of good things. So basically, when you activate it, when you get sulforaphane, it upregulates a particular gene which produces NRF2. So NRF2 gets upregulated by sulforaphane. Now, why does that matter? Because NRF2 is what we call a master gene. It controls many other genes, controls the expression of many other genes. It upregulates some genes, downregulates others. But the interesting thing about NRF2 is cumulatively, when you activate it, you reduce inflammation in the body. You reduce inflammation. Now, cooking vegetables can destroy myrosinase, which means you don't make as much sulforaphane if you cook the broccoli, for example. So eating your vegetables raw gives you more of the benefit, more of the sulforaphane. So smoothies, that kind of thing, are the best way to ingest these compounds and produce sulforaphane. Although people do make their own myrosinase in our own bodies, which can therefore activate the glucoraphanin and give you sulforaphane. But different people produce different amounts of myrosinase, so you can't guarantee it. So sulforaphane and the brain. So a pilot trial found sulforaphane treatment increased glutathione levels, the body and brain's most abundant antioxidants. Antioxidants are good. They get rid of free radicals, damaging molecules that damage your cells and your body. In this particular trial, they found that glutathione levels increased in the blood and the hippocampus of healthy people. Remember, the hippocampus is the part of our brain that is responsible for generating memory. It's also the part of the brain that gets destroyed first when someone suffers from Alzheimer's disease. Sulforaphane clears away brain amyloid plaques and tau tangles, which is another defective protein that you find in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. And it ameliorates memory defects in mice that are engineered to develop Alzheimer's disease. So it's good for the brain, good for memory, good for getting rid of damaging compounds such as beta amyloid and tau protein. Several clinical trials have already shown sulforaphane may help improve neuronal health in healthy people, but also may help to reduce the effects of neurodegenerative disorders such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, as well as traumatic brain injury. Various animal studies have shown that sulforaphane helps all of these neurological conditions. Sulforaphane also increases heat shock proteins in the brains of mice. Heat shock proteins play a role in disaggregating protein aggregates such as beta amyloid and tau. So it's a good thing to increase heat shock protein levels. By the way, another way to increase heat shock protein levels is to take sauna. Basically, regular sauna use does increase the amount of heat shock proteins in the body. And as a result of that, you have a sort of protection against Alzheimer's. In fact, a study was performed in Finland where sauna use is it's big. Basically, every home, every business has a sauna in it. This study determined that people that use saunas very regularly tend to have reduced levels of various diseases, including Alzheimer's disease. So you can take the sauna, or you can take the sulforaphane, or you can do both. Very good for you. Several clinical trials have already shown sulforaphane may help improve neuronal health in healthy people, but also may help to reduce the effects of neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, as well as traumatic brain injury. So you get a brain injury, you take your sulforaphane, then maybe it won't be as damaging as it otherwise would have been. Various animal studies have shown that sulforaphane helps many neurological conditions. It also increases heat shock proteins in the brains of mice. Mice have been tested, and heat shock protein levels increase in the brains of mice treated with sulforaphane. And therefore, And basically, with these animals, we've found that heat shock protein increase by sulforaphane reduces the amount of inflammation and also gets rid of beta amyloid and tau proteins. Sulforaphane and longevity. The insulin and IGF-1 pathways are important in mammalian metabolism, physiology, and aging, and also influence the expression of a variety of antioxidant genes. IGF-1 inhibits the activity of another protein, FOXO3, which is a master regulator of many mammalian genes involved in oxidative stress, tolerance, and aging. Mice that lack the insulin receptor or the IGF-1 receptor live longer and are more resistant to oxidative stress than normal mice. It's been observed that sulforaphane consumption promotes health and extends lifespan, also in nematode worms, very small worm. The mechanisms that mediated these effects involved inhibition of insulin and IGF-1, and basically the signaling of these proteins, and the activation of a FOXO analog called DAF16, which you find in the nematodes. The downstream effect of this inhibition was increased expression of antioxidant genes similar to those involved in oxidative stress tolerance and aging in mammals. So yes, it's a worm. We're not worms, but a lot of the genes that these worms have, we also have. So if we can increase longevity in nematodes with sulforaphane, then that hints that there's a possibility we can do the same with mammals and humans. Sulforaphane and cancer. Sulforaphane has been observed to have anti-cancer properties in a number of in vitro and animal studies, reducing both the size and number of various types of cancer cells. It may prevent cancer proliferation by releasing antioxidant enzymes that protect against carcinogens. That's one proposed mechanism for sulforaphane's effect on cancer. Regarding the heart, sulforaphane may benefit the cardiovascular system by reducing inflammation. Inflammation can lead to narrowing of your heart arteries, something associated, for example, with smoking. Research in rats indicates that sulforaphane may reduce high blood pressure and thus improve the general health of the cardiovascular system. Note that the effects on inflammation led to trials of sulforaphane to treat autism. There is just some preliminary evidence that sulforaphane may reduce the severity of autism. So it's increasingly looking like autism may involve some sort of mild inflammation in the brain. And sulforaphane seems to bring that inflammation down and perhaps reduces the symptoms or the severity of autism. Regarding diabetes, a 12-week study in 97 people with type 2 diabetes examined how consuming a broccoli sprout extract, remember broccoli sprouts are very high in sulforaphane, which is a high source of sulforaphane, and therefore basically high levels of broccoli sprouts seem to reduce blood sugar levels. So potential treatment for type 2 diabetes. Not type 1. Type 1 is a different condition. That's when you just don't make insulin. But type 2 is the type of diabetes that tends to result from poor glucose regulation, usually linked to a poor diet. The study concluded that sulforaphane reduced fasting blood sugar levels by 6.5% and improved hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker of long-term blood sugar control. These effects were most robust in participants who were obese with poor diabetes control. Doesn't mean it won't work with healthy people too, though. Well, we're talking about diabetes. Another drug that's used to treat diabetes, type 2, is known as metformin. Now, this isn't a compound you can just pick up from a health food store. Metformin is regulated. In some countries, you can just go to a chemist and get it. In others, you need a prescription. Metformin was discovered back in the 1950s, and it has been used to treat type 2 diabetes. So let me talk about metformin now. This is a drug that you can't just buy in a health food shop. but it does seem to have some striking health benefits, not just for people with diabetes. So metformin, it's a derivative of biguanide and is one of the most commonly used drugs to treat type 2 diabetes. It's been used for over 60 years to treat type 2 diabetes due to its ability to decrease plasma glucose levels, so the amount of glucose in your blood. Diseases that metformin seems to ameliorate include cancers, breast cancer, endometrial cancer, bone cancer, colorectal cancer, and melanoma, obesity, liver disease, cardiovascular disease, and renal disease. Now, metformin wasn't used to treat these diseases initially. It was used to treat type 2 diabetes. But researchers observed after many years of people taking metformin that these diabetics, the metformin didn't just help with their diabetes, it seemed to reduce the risks of various cancers, even above those of healthy volunteers, healthy controls. So as a result, metformin is now starting to be used sort of off-label, particularly in places like Silicon Valley, to extend health and longevity and to improve heart health and lower the risks of cancer. There's also some evidence that metformin may extend both health span and lifespan, although effects on lifespan are still inconclusive. The experiments are ongoing. PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. Metformin is used when treating polycystic ovary syndrome. However, it's not officially approved for polycystic ovary syndrome in most countries, but it does seem to work. It does seem to help reduce that quite debilitating condition. So a little bit more about metformin. It's an anti-hyperglycemia drug. So it stops blood glucose levels from getting too high. High glucose in the blood is dangerous. So metformin seems to have an effect on that, reduces blood glucose levels. So various cellular and animal studies show that metformin inhibits the expression of gluconeogenic genes. Gluconeogenic just means, well, gluconeogenesis is when you make sugar from your glycogen stored in your liver. That sugar is then released into the blood. So it seems to inhibit this process, so stopping your blood from filling with sugar, so to speak. So basically, it inhibits expression of gluconeogenic genes in AMPK-dependent pathways and AMPK-independent pathways. These are pathways involved in various, well, they're basically involved in regulating the metabolism. This suppresses hepatic glucose production. Metformin decreases glucose levels by impairing lactate utilization for gluconeogenesis, enhances glucose transport and uptake, and is also thought to alter the diversity of the gut biome too. Metformin prevents growth, survival, and metastasis of various tumor cells, and also changes the tumor microenvironment to suppress cancer development. Its underlying molecular mechanisms include the inhibition of mTOR signaling. mTOR is very important part of metabolism. Basically, if you have too much mTOR, you've got a higher risk of developing cancer. It's needed for growth of cells, for them to grow and divide. You reduce mTOR levels, you reduce the likelihood that cells will grow and divide out of control. So metformin inhibits mTOR signaling, the activation of P53, autophagy and apoptosis, decreases generation of reactive oxygen species, free radicals. It also helps prevent DNA damage and modulates the inflammatory response. So metformin has beneficial effects on liver disease, obesity, cardiovascular disease, age-related diseases, and renal diseases, and therefore reduces all-cause mortality. So these actions of metformin are all related to this molecule that I mentioned earlier, AMPK. So it's all involved with the regulation of AMPK. Partly to do with the mitochondria in the cells. The mitochondria in the cells are the powerhouses of the cell. It's where we make ATP, the energy currency of the cell. Now, if you can play around with mitochondria, so in this case, by inhibiting complex 1, which is within the mitochondria, you basically affect cellular metabolism, and you help the cells to go into a sort of more efficient lean burn, generating less damaging molecules. Okay, so that's metformin. And as I mentioned, a lot of people in places like Silicon Valley are taking it off-label. I should mention that metformin does have some side effects, mainly in the guts. You can get nausea, you can have an upset stomach, you can feel sick, you can get diarrhea from taking metformin. But its benefits seem to outweigh the drawbacks. So now I am going to talk about another drug. This drug, again, this is something you need a prescription for. It's known as rapamycin. It's a small molecule inhibitor of mTOR. So mTOR really stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. Basically, rapamycin was discovered on Easter Island, hence the rap part of it. So it was discovered there, and it turns out that rapamycin does inhibit mTOR, and it is therefore being used initially for to try and prevent rejection of transplanted organs. But more recently, it's been shown that rapamycin also is also involved in the pathways of aging and health generally. So these mTOR complexes, these mechanistic targets of rapamycin, regulate a number of pathways that are required for cell growth and metabolism, functioning as a signaling hub that integrates cellular nutrient and stress status and induces appropriate cellular responses. It's been shown to slow down the appearance of many markers of aging and to extend longevity in a number of different model systems, including several animals. We don't know yet whether rapamycin would extend longevity in humans, because healthy humans are not being given rapamycin. But it may well do. Rapamycin may increase longevity in humans. A major mechanism through which rapamycin interacts with cells is the mTOR, and a number of studies have linked the disruption of this pathway to cancer, obesity, diabetes, and various other neurological and biological conditions. So playing around with mTOR levels, reducing the levels with rapamycin, also potential to reduce the likelihood of developing many diseases, some very severe diseases, in fact. So the mTOR pathway integrates a variety of environmental signals that signal whether conditions are favorable for anabolic processes such as growth, cellular division, that kind of thing. Cells in a multicellular organism integrate information relating to the local availability of nutrients, as well as the needs of the entire organism, determined by circulating molecules such as hormones. The mTOR pathway responds to various stimuli, including growth factors, insulin, IGF-1, the levels of amino acids and glucose, the cellular energy status, and availability of oxygen. So mTOR seems to respond when times are good. So when you've got lots of food, lots of nutrients, mTOR tends to be active. Your cells are more likely to become cancerous, but you're also better able to grow and you have more energy and all the rest of it. It's a trade-off. But rapamycin inhibits it and therefore prevents, to a certain extent, the development of various cancers. In mice, rapamycin was found to extend lives and delay some age-related problems such as cancer. The most dramatic longevity effects, though, were observed in females. Both males and females tend to live longer, that is, in organisms such as mice, when supplemented with rapamycin, but females much longer. So a more striking effect in females. A 2016 study showed brief therapy during middle age with rapamycin dramatically extended mouse lives. You see, normally in these experiments, they give the animals rapamycin for their entire life, and you get a longevity result. They increase in longevity. They can survive for longer when fed rapamycin for their entire life. But this 2016 study showed that even if mice just have a normal diet, no rapamycin until they reach middle age, even if you don't give them the rapamycin until they are middle-aged, it will still have an effect. So basically, even if you leave it quite a while before rapamycin treatment and some aging has already occurred, you still extend longevity, the final age that the organism dies. At least that is the case in mice. Various other animal experiments are also underway. So these studies' findings revealed the need to further examine how gender and dose influence side effects and the drug's impact on susceptibility to and protection from different types of cancer. You see, the thing is that there are side effects to rapamycin, and some of the side effects are quite strong, quite severe, which is why rapamycin isn't being given to all old people to increase longevity. But with the right dose, side effects can be mitigated. And perhaps if rapamycin is only given later in life, then you don't have a lifetime of side effects. Okay, so this study that I've been talking about, the 2016 study, this research showed that a transient dose of rapamycin in middle age was enough to basically increase life expectancy, improve measures of healthy aging, and various other markers of health. The scientists treated mice with rapamycin for 90 days. The treatment started at 20 months of age, so middle-aged mice. So that's about the age of 60 in a human. The control mice and the rapamycin-treated mice were basically, say that again. The control mice and the rapamycin-treated mice were maintained identically prior to and following the treatment period. The rapamycin-treated mice lived up to 60% longer following cessation of the treatment compared to the animals that received a control treatment. So basically, even when you're given the compound in middle age, you still get a much longer lifespan. So when we think about aging, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the skin. It's the most obvious sign of aging. You can't tell looking at someone necessarily what is going on in their internal organs, but you can see the skin, and old skin tends to be wrinkly and saggy. Well, it seems that rapamycin affects the aging of the skin. So a small clinical trial from the Drexel University College of Medicine found that regular application of rapamycin to the backs of the hands reduces wrinkles, skin sagging, and also improves the tone of the skin. They performed an 8-month study, so 8 months of treatment. Following 8 months of treatment, most of the hands that had received rapamycin applications exhibited an increase in collagen and lower levels of a marker of aging in skin cells compared with a placebo control group. Now, collagen is essential in the skin. It's what makes the skin thicker and helps prevent wrinkles. But collagen is useful inside the body too. We have collagen throughout our body where it performs a structural function. So rapamycin seems to help thicken collagen, reduce wrinkles, and probably has some benefits internally due to its effects on collagen as well. So not just visibly. Regarding the brain, as early as 2010, a study showed that inhibition of mTOR by rapamycin slows down or blocks Alzheimer's disease progression in a mouse model. So this was in mice. Rapamycin may be a potentially effective therapeutic agent for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, although work is still going on in that area. In 2011, it was observed that 18-month-old mice treated with rapamycin, starting from about 2 months of age, performed significantly better on a task measuring spatial learning and memory as compared to matched mice that were on a control diet, that were raised on a control diet. The study also showed that the rapamycin-mediated improvement in learning and memory was associated with a decrease in IL-1 beta levels. This is a marker of the, well, a sort of marker of the immune system, really, but certainly a marker of health. There was also an increase in NMDA signaling. What is NMDA? NMDA mimics the effects of glutamate, with NMDA receptors regulating a physiologic substrate for memory function in the brain. The activation of NMDA receptors in the hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in memory, controls the induction of an activity-dependent synaptic modification called long-term potentiation. Basically, the rapamycin, by influencing an NMDA, results in more neuronal connections in the brain. More neuronal connections, more efficient connections. So this improves memory and cognition. Regarding the heart, late life rapamycin treatment has been shown to reverse age-related heart dysfunction. In a 2013 study, 24-month-old female mice were treated with rapamycin for 3 months, and the effects on health using a variety of non-invasive measures of cardiovascular, skeletal, and metabolic health were determined. When the data was analyzed, it turned out that following treatment, the inflammation rates within cardiac tissue, the heart, was reduced. So it seems that rapamycin affects both metabolism and structure of the cardiovascular system in a positive way. So basically, rapamycin seems to affect the entire cardiovascular system. And by affecting the cardiovascular system in a positive way, you reduce the amount of heart disease, stroke, blood pressure, things like that. So rapamycin may be used in the future as a preventative against the diseases of the cardiovascular system that accumulate on average with age. Okay, so just to summarize what we've said so far, there are a lot of supplements available. Some you can get without prescription, some you need a prescription for. However, even the ones that you do not need a prescription for, some of them have been shown to have health benefits. You can get resveratrol from a health food store. You can get quercetin from a health food store. So certain compounds you can obtain yourself if you want to help improve your health and longevity. Obviously, this is not medical advice on my part. I'm a scientist, not a medical doctor. However, from experiments that have been performed over the years, including some by me, compounds such as resveratrol and quercetin seem to benefit health and longevity, but without the negative consequences that more powerful drugs might have. As for metformin and rapamycin, they are prescription only at the moment, so difficult to get hold of, but in the future, that might not be the case. Or new variants of metformin or rapamycin may be developed that are safer with less side effects and that can therefore help improve health and longevity in a safe way. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @MarkOfTheD. That's @MarkOfthe. I'm quite controversial on Twitter, be warned. But if you would like to follow me, there I am. I do tweet quite a lot. If you want to support my podcast, you can do so by going to the Science on the Edge website, scienceontheedge.com, and clicking on the donate button just to keep me motivated. But that's all for now. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Goodbye.